From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
A transnational fraud ring stole millions from Army members and veterans. Business leaders admit willingness to pay five-figure ransoms, and Facebook has a week it really didn't like. These are some of the stories my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Adrian Ludwig, the Chief Trust Officer at Atlassian. Adrian, great to have you on the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
All right, we want to thank our sponsor, Votiro, for making the show possible. We'll be talking about them in just a moment. And remember, you can join us on Crowdcast. We got the link right up here. If you're watching live, join in, comment on the stories as we go through. We love to see that. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump into the show. Transnational fraud ring stole millions from Army members and veterans. Frederick Bound, a former U.S. Army contractor, was sentenced this week to 151 months in prison after admitting to his role in a conspiracy that targeted thousands of U.S. service members and veterans and caused millions of dollars in losses. He harvested personally identifiable information by taking photos of his screen while being logged into his Armed Forces Health Longitudinal Technology Application account. You can tell the government named that system. This allowed him and his accomplices to steal millions of dollars from veterans' pensions and disability benefits payments and U.S. military members' bank accounts. Besides the prison term, Brown was also ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. So, Adrian, this is, for insider risk, this is decidedly low tech, kind of the equivalent of the old spy camera in there. How much should this be on someone's radar for insider threat for personal devices like this? I know there was a big concern, the no camera cell phone was kind of standard issue when those started to become commonplace.
Oh yeah, it's impossible at this point to keep the phones out, much less the cameras out that have gotten smaller and smaller. The thing that's about this story that cracks me up, although it's also a little bit depressing, is that $2 million. Do you think he's still got that sitting around somewhere so that he can actually pay that restitution? Like who's going to make these people whole? And ultimately, that's the question, right? Are companies being held accountable for the consequences when there's a bad actor in their environment? I think the answer is basically no. But I think we'll probably see some change over time where companies do begin to have that level of accountability, even if somebody is doing something that's clearly illegal, as was the case here.
Is the answer to that just, I guess, greater company accountability? Like, is there anything? Is the cat just out of the bag with cell phones? Like, this is just the cost of having employees access to computers at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's possible to have some additional, monitoring of what's going on in those environments. But realistically, yeah, I don't think there's anything that you can do. If somebody has that level of visibility, you just can't run a business where you mistrust everybody to the point where you could protect against this kind of thing.
This is where there's definitely a vendor that will sell you a video camera that uses machine learning to tell when someone's holding a cell phone up to a screen, and we all enter the dystopia.
I'm sure that'll be better.
Yeah, exactly. Clearview AI, watch out. Next up, business leaders admit willingness to pay five-figure ransoms. 40% of UK business executives would be willing to pay at least a five-figure ransom to restore operations following an attack. This is according to research conducted by the security firm Arctic Wolf. The research also found that 20% of UK execs have previously concealed a cyber attack to preserve their reputation. 67% of respondents believe their company is more vulnerable to attacks if staff work remotely or in a hybrid environment. And 62% are unsure whether IT teams can identify and detect some threats accurately. Adrian, did any, a lot of statistics here, these reports always have them. Any particular ones stand out to you?
I love this survey, as is the case with almost all security surveys, because what they didn't say is actually what's more interesting than what they did say. So 80% of UK execs wouldn't pay 10 grand to protect their customers against ransomware. That's fascinating. I wonder why. I'd love to dig into that one. But the one that really jumped out at me is that 67% of respondents, right, that are now worried about at-home work. What have they been doing the last 18 months? What are they doing right now to deal with that risk? Have they actually gotten better? Maybe it was 100% a year and a half ago, and maybe it's gotten a lot better. I don't know. But it definitely goes to the fact that, we've created this survey, we've written this article. It's like not helpful. I don't think we benefited from reading it at all.
Yeah. Without some historical context, you're absolutely right. Like, if there was a spectrum of being like, yes, I'm sure there's possibly the possibility of more vulnerability versus, over time that decreasing, or if you could wait on a spectrum, like I think concerned about like more vulnerable. Again, the ambiguity of language betrays any good survey, but interesting to see. We get these all the time, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the phrasing on those sometimes opens up more questions than answers, for sure.
For sure, yeah. And it's like, I'm trying to figure out how I can use the information, right? And I think the security industry in general is awash in statistics that are meaningless, and this just feels like a stack of them, right? Security people need to do their job. Their job is hard. That's what these statistics are saying. And great, let's go do it.
There's always a market for people to publish surveys to make people feel like their job is hard, I guess is the answer to that.
I think I'm underpaid. Let me talk to them.
All right, our next story here was probably the big one for the week. Kind of a double duty here. Facebook whistleblower comes out of the shadows, and Facebook services and apps go dark for about half a day. Obviously, the big story we were talking about. First up, we have Frances Haugen, who worked with the company's Facebook civic integrity team and has some serious allegations about the way Facebook allegedly leverages controversial content to boost readership, which has been covered by the Wall Street Journal's Facebook files. This is nothing. There's no particularly new disclosures with Frances Haugen coming forward. It is interesting to see like her motivations for doing so, definitely in that piece. But we also saw Facebook services suddenly go dark. It was supposedly due to an upgrade procedure. And what Facebook has said is that engineers issued a malformed command to assess global availability, which unintentionally took down all connections in Facebook's internal network. You may say, shouldn't they have tools to prevent that? They did, but there was a bug in their auditing tool that then allowed this malformed query to go through. This was only possible then since Facebook's DNS servers disable BGP for a data center if it's unavailable, they then shut down all of the BGP, including the DNS servers themselves, so no one knew where to phone home to. To its credit, though, Facebook said its own internal hardening procedures made its recovery even slower, because it turns out it's like generally a good thing to make it hard to get physical access to your data center, except when all the BGP is unavailable, it turns out. So I mean, obviously, from a tech and security angle, I think the outage is much more interesting. Adrian, from your perspective, I guess, have a lot of companies, a lot of individuals rely on these services. I think WhatsApp, particularly for a lot of businesses, probably was a major issue. Kind of thoughts on this cascade of failures for this big of an outage for Facebook?
Well, the one thing that I did want to comment on that was news for me, I didn't realize that Facebook had a civic integrity team where apparently their job is like maintain civilization. And when they're underfunded, we start to have pretty big problems.
Well, so they had, and then they disbanded it, which was the motivation for Ms. Haugen to talk to the Wall Street Journal.
We have a lot of empathy with Ms. Haugen, I guess is her name. And for anybody that's in one of these roles, right? As security people, we're constantly saying, oh, we're underfunded. This is a hard mission. It might be an impossible mission. And it's just hard to get the appreciation for it. Same true with the outage, right? Here we are, Facebook, probably one of the few that we have an expectation that their borderline 100% uptime is going to follow through. I don't know if anybody's done the math yet to figure out what their revenue drop is going to be. I know the markets didn't respond great to it. It's got to be a $1 billion typo on the order of. So clearly a huge thing. But at the same time, like, it's just the reality of running things this complicated is we don't realize how big and difficult they are, and trying to restart them is basically impossible.
Any sympathy to the argument? Security expert Ben Hammersley on Twitter had said, if business service gun, it will actively disrupt millions of businesses and lives. To consider Facebook like critical infrastructure, any of these kind of like online services critical infrastructure. I know that opens up it's a political question then at that point, but like, does that if you're I guess a business building on these services, does this outage kind of change any kind of equation, or is this just kind of an almost like an act of God situation?
I think it's a critical infrastructure for Facebook shareholders. It already was, right? And I don't think there's any government or other body that would be capable of making it more resilient than Facebook is. So go ahead, call it critical infrastructure. I don't think that's going to change anything. If anything, it's going to make it harder for them to move quickly, harder for them to get stuff done, and probably harder to get back up. Because not only would they have to figure out what the passcode was to get into the data center, but they'd have to go past a bunch of Marines too, which it wouldn't have made things much easier for them on that day.
All right. Well, before I move on to our next story, we want to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor, Votiro. Your users need to accept and open files to do their jobs. Keep them safe and productive with Votiro. With Votiro, your users can download and use any file instantly, from PDF to Autodesk CAD, with malicious code already removed and full file usability intact. The signatureless, agentless file sanitation process happens in milliseconds without user friction. Visit Votiro.com and learn why millions of users trust Votiro to disarm billions of files each year. All right, our next story here. Senate committee drops new FISMA reform bill. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has introduced a new bipartisan overhaul of the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, which governs civil federal cybersecurity. FISMA was last updated in 2014, which basically is an eternity in cybersecurity years. The new bill positions CISA to advise the Office of Management and Budget on information security policies and practices, conduct risk assessments of federal agencies, and coordinate cybersecurity activities across the federal government. The reform aims to address systemic security failures identified across government agencies. Earlier this year, we've seen in really post SolarWinds hack, we've seen the government both optically scrambling to respond, and also a lot of updates like this with expansions of CISA's mandate, tons of more funding. Now the update to FISMA here. Does it feel like we're moving in the right direction, Adrian, or is this going to be a case of over management, too many departments, and then still having the problem of people not knowing where to go in the event of a security incident where there is critical infrastructure at stake?
I mean, the fact that it was bipartisan means we're probably moving at least something in the right direction. So that's nice to see. Ultimately, 7 years ago, yeah, it's an eternity. It's not an eternity for something going through Capitol Hill. That's like light speed for Capitol Hill. And that's going to be the reality of any effort to regulate industries connected to cyber, connected to tech, connected to basically modern life at this point. It's going to move so much more quickly than the legislative system allows it to respond. So I think it's good. I think, updating things, modernizing things, having them be a little bit more relevant is probably helpful. And certainly having a discussion and causing that debate to take place is helpful. Do I think there's going to be a massive change in those organizations? It's not going to be driven by this. It's going to be driven by organizational reform. It's going to be driven by changes within, the individual executive branches that are the ones that are struggling, because they are. It's hard to keep up for sure.
Definitely. Our next story here: The Telegraph exposes 10 terabyte database containing subscriber info. One of the UK's largest newspapers and online media outlets, The Telegraph, has leaked 10 terabytes of subscriber data after failing to properly secure one of its databases. That seems like, I don't know what they're storing their subscribers in. That's so much subscriber data.
I had this exact discussion with my kid this morning. He's like, "What's a terabyte?" I was like, "Well, it's not." Wait, 600 users, 10 terabytes? This makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, so here are some of the details here. Security researcher Bob Dianchenko, who is doing yeoman's work finding all of these unsecured Elasticsearch and other databases online, confirmed that at least 1,200 encrypted contacts were accessible without a password. The Telegraph was contacted about the exposure immediately, but it took 2 days to secure the database. The Telegraph statement asserts that no subscribers are at risk, since Dianchenko was the first and last person to access the sensitive data set. That last statement, outside of the 10 terabytes, I don't know what Bob found. Maybe it's just like a ton of log files. I don't understand.
That could be
all the log files in the universe. But it does kind of feel like it fits into the, what could possibly go wrong bucket. I guess 2 days for a media company doesn't seem like the most egregious length of time, considering we've seen
pretty fast.
Months and months go by. But are we okay with the idea of, that this is just, again, something that's going to happen when we put things in cloud databases, like that? These kind of access control issues, again, are almost unavoidable?
I mean, I think yes and no, or no, I'm told is the appropriate expression for this kind of thing. Is it okay? No, it's clearly not okay. Is it the fault of the Telegraph? Like, that's what we're doing, right? We're looking at a situation where there's a company who apparently has a media management problem in general, right? That's still the 10 terabytes and 600 people. It's like, makes no sense to me. But independent of that, do we expect that every single company in the world is going to be able to manage things perfectly? No, it's unreasonable. But that's the approach that we take right now. We talk about this as though it were this one company had a problem. They made a mistake. This one person found it. When in reality, what we've got is a system where we've sharded out the responsibility and we expect every single one of these companies to behave perfectly all the time. It's just never going to work. And so we have to start a bigger conversation about how do we build infrastructure that doesn't have this happen over and over and over again. But that's who can have that conversation, right? Why is this not who's the cloud provider that their data was on, and what is it that they're going to do to make this less likely to happen in the future? That's the real conversation that we should be having.
Yeah, this is a sexy media story that has a very boring infrastructure solution in terms of access control. Although, I guess if you want to find out if you have a database online that's not secured, talk to Bob Dianchenko, because the dude is on it.
There you go. And like, when's the last time the Telegraph left the door open and somebody walked in and picked something up? Like, that didn't get, like, that's the weirdness of the way that these things get reported.
Although if they had a 10 terabyte hard drive, it'd probably be very big and hard to walk out with, because that's so much data. I don't understand. All right, next up here, ransomware hackers find vulnerable targets in the U.S. grain supply. This is kind of a continuing story we've been monitoring. A third U.S. grain distributor has been infected with ransomware, raising concerns that hackers have found an easy target in a vital part of the U.S. food supply chain. The largest of the three known victims, New Cooperative in Iowa, is still working to restore automated systems after being hacked in September. Crystal Valley in Minnesota was hit shortly afterwards, and now Farmers Cooperative Company, also in Iowa, has been hit. CISA representatives suggest that these three attacks do not represent a dedicated assault on the agricultural industry, just opportunistic hackers. But Adrian, my question is, given, let's assume that's true, isn't that worse that if it's an advanced persistent threat that's trying to like hammer the US grain system, okay, we've discovered that's a problem. If it's just this is the low-hanging fruit, isn't that worse?
No, they're just trying to get a balanced breakfast. Like, didn't they take out the meat producers about a month ago?
Yeah.
And I'm shorting juice stocks right now because that's what's coming next, right?
I mean, logically, yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like, it doesn't make me feel better that stuff just falls over by accident, and we can't prevent it. At least if it was intentional, that the bad actor would realize that they're doing a pretty good job and maybe stop at some point. So yeah, I agree. It feels worse because it's random.
It feels weird to say I wish it was an advanced persistent threat, but there you go. That's the world we live in today. All right, and our last story of the day: Twitch's source code leaked, a server error to blame. The Verge confirmed a 125 gigabyte torrent posted on 4chan contains the game stream broadcasting platform Twitch's source code, including its code commit history. The poster of the leak claims they did so to foster more disruption and competition in the online video streaming space. You can read into that however you want. The leak also includes 3 years of creator payout records, which is causing some drama, code related to proprietary SDKs and internal AWS services, and an unreleased Steam competitor from Amazon, which to me is like kind of fascinating to see. Twitch later said the breach was caused by a server configuration change that exposed some data that was subsequently accessed by a malicious third party. The Amazon-owned company has not confirmed if all data posted online is genuine or when this mistake was made effectively, although the code commit history indicates it was as of this month. So we know it's extraordinarily recent. But so Adrian, the question here is, we just saw Epic, the web host of Last Resort, kind of go through a similar thing where they had basically all of their service infrastructure leaked online.
Oops.
Is like, what is Twitch's move here after this from a security posture standpoint?
What's their move? I like the sports error, right? It's a baseball reference, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more like an own goal or an own posting of the entire infrastructure public, but maybe that's the wanting to be Ted Lasso in me. I don't know. I listen to companies all the time tell me the crown jewels are our source code. And I kind of crack up because I'm like, no, it's not. Like, there's so much more about what it is that a service provides than your source code. So for me, it was actually a little bit of a learning that you could accidentally leak your entire corporate roadmap and strategy for the next couple of years by having your source code dumped. So yeah, that was a good learning. I guess they're going to have to either run faster to stay ahead of their competitors that they now know what the services are that they're going to be launching over the next couple months, or they'll have to pivot and go in a different direction to maintain some sort of core to their corporate direction.
Does this show that like insider threat, like no one has insider threat really figured out? Because we saw Facebook has a whistleblower that was accessing things on Facebook Workplace, and no one caught wind of that for months on end. Amazon has their entire source code seemingly leaked. I would think it had to have come from someone on the inside. That seems the most likely, at least to me. Is that just hey, insider threat detection is really hard for anybody, especially for companies this big?
I'm guessing that this wasn't actually insider threat, this
Okay.
particular one at Twitch. My guess is that this was an error, right? They just opened up a repository. It happened to be all of their source code, and it went out. And then they realized, whoops, that was not what we should have been doing. But maybe it could have been an insider. But I think they would have fingered an individual if that's what was going on.
That's true.
So
yes,
it's probably more like the other Facebook story from this week.
Just an engineer with the worst day.
Open it all up. Sometimes you accidentally shut it all down.
All right. Any story here that's kind of a particular thumbs up, like really interesting, or just kind of made your eye roll in the rundown here today?
I love the fact that the entirety of Twitch's infrastructure is smaller than a user database from the Telegraph.
That's the lesson we've learned. It turns out, put some compression on it. I don't even know what's happening. Come on, put in a zip file. Come on, what are you doing here? All right, Adrian, where can people find you if they want to hear more from you and your sage wisdom?
They can't. I hide out at Atlassian. I keep doing my job there. I deleted my Facebook account last week. It's possible that that's what caused their infrastructure to go down. I'm not sure. It's the world's largest GDPR request. No, I'm just lurking out there.
All right. Well, check out everything going on at Atlassian. Keep up to date with all of their stuff. Good stuff. And thank you, Adrian Ludwig. Really appreciate your time. This was great. We also want to thank our sponsor, Votiro, for their support of the show. And remember, you can come back next week for our Friday video chat, Hacking Security Champions, an hour of critical thinking about how to turn non-security people into security leaders. It starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, followed by a meetup, and then we'll be back for another edition of the Week in Review, Friday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. All the live content you could possibly want on a Friday. Come and join us. Remember, we have cybersecurity headlines every day, 6 minutes of your time, and you can get caught up on all the security news that's fit to talk into a microphone. All the details, CISOseries.com. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.